Yeah. Okay, so yesterday we had stopped at page number 52 in the ebook. So now we will be starting with chapter 8, How to Interest People. Everyone who has one, yeah, everyone who was ever guest of Theodore Roosevelt was astonished at the range and diversity of his knowledge. Whether his visitor was a cowboy or a rough rider, a New York politician or a diplomat, Roosevelt knew what to say. And how was it done? The answer was simple. Whenever Roosevelt expected a visitor, he sat up late the night before, reading upon the subject in which he knew his guest was particularly interested. For Roosevelt knew, as all leaders know, that the royal road to a person's heart is to talk about the things he or she treasures most. The genial William Lyon Phelps, essayist and professor of literature at Yale, learned this lesson early in life. When I was 8 years old and was spending a weekend visiting my aunt Libby Lindsley at her home in Stratford on the Housatonic, he wrote in his essay on human nature. A middle aged man called one evening, and after a polite skirmish with my aunt, he devoted his attention to me. At that time, I happened to be excited about boats, and the visitor discussed the subject in a way that seemed to me particularly interesting. After he left, I spoke of him with enthusiasm. What a man! My aunt informed me he was a New York lawyer, that he cared nothing whatever about boats, that he took not the slightest interest in the subject. But why then did he talk all the time about boats? Because he's a gentleman. He saw you were interested in boats, and he talked about the things he knew would interest and please you. He made himself agreeable. And William Lycan Phelps added, I never forgot my aunt's remark. As I write this chapter, I have before me a letter from Edward L. Chalif, who was active in Boy Scout work. One day, I found I needed a favor, wrote Mr. Chalif. A big scout jamboree was coming off in Europe, and I wanted the president of one of the largest corporations in America to pay the expenses of one of my boys for the trip. Fortunately, just before I went to see this man, I heard that he had drawn a check for $1 million and that after it was cancelled, he had it framed. So, the first thing I did when I entered his office was to ask to see the check. A check for $1 million. I told him I never knew that anybody had ever written such a check and that I wanted to tell my boys that I had actually seen a check for $1 million. He gladly showed it to me. I admired it and asked him to tell me all about it, about how it happened to be drawn. You notice, don't you, that Mr. Shalif didn't begin by talking about the Boy Scouts or the Jamboree in Europe or what it was he wanted. He talked in terms of what interested the other man. Here's the result. Presently, the man I was interviewing said, Oh, by the way, what, what was it you wanted to see me about? I told him. To my vast surprise, Mr. Chalif continues. He's not only granted immediately what I asked for, but much more. I had asked him to send only one boy to Europe, but he sent 5 boys and myself. Gave me a letter of credit for $1,000 and told us to stay in Europe for 7 weeks. He also gave me letters of introduction to his branch presidents, putting them at our service, and he himself met us in Paris and showed us the town. Since then, he has given jobs to some of the boys whose parents were in want, and he is still inactive in our group. Yet I know if I hadn't found out what he was interested in and got him warmed up first, I wouldn't have found him 1/10 as easy to approach. Is this a valuable technique to use in business? Is it? Let's see. Take Henry G. Duvorny of Duvomy and Sons, a wholesome baking firm in New York. Mr. Duvorny had been trying to sell bread to a certain New York hotel. He had called on the manager every week for 4 years. He went on to the same official affairs the manager attended. He even took rooms in the hotel and lived there in order to get the business. But he failed. Then, said Duvorny, after studying human relations, I resolved to change my tactics. I decided to find out what what interested this man, what caught his enthusiasm. I discovered he belonged to a society of hotel executives called Hotel Greeters of America. He not only belonged, but his bubbling enthusiasm had made him president of the organization and president of the International Greeters. No matter where its conventions were held, he would be there. So when I saw him the next day, I began talking about the greeters. What a response I got! What a response! He talked to me for half an hour about the greeters, his tones vibrant with enthusiasm. I could plainly see that this society was not only his hobby, it was a passion for his life. Before I left his office, he had sold me a membership in his organization. In the meantime, I had said nothing about bread, but a few days later, the steward of his hotel phoned me to come over with samples and prices. I don't know what you did to the old boy, the steward greeted me, but he sure is sold on you. Think of it. I had been drumming at that man for 4 years, trying to get his business, and I'd still be drumming at him if he hadn't finally taken the trouble to find out what he was interested in and what he enjoyed talking about. Edward E. Harriman of Hagerstown, Maryland, chose to live in the beautiful Cumberland Valley of Maryland after he completed his military service. Unfortunately, at that time, there were few jobs available in the area. A little research uncovered the fact that a number of companies in the area were either owned or controlled by an unusual business maverick, R.J. Funkhauser, whose rise from poverty to riches intrigued Mr. Harriman. However, he was known for being inaccessible to job seekers, Mr. Harriman wrote. I interviewed a number of people and found that his major interest was anchored in his drive for power and money. Since he protected himself from people like me by use of a dedicated and stern secretary, I studied her interests and goals, and only then I paid an unannounced visit at her office. She had been Mr. Funkhauser's orbiting satellite for about 15 years. When I told her I had a proposition for him, which might translate itself into financial and political success for him, she became enthused. I also conversed with her about her constructive participation in his success. After this conversation, she arranged for me to meet Mr. Funkhauser. I entered his huge and impressive office, determined not to ask directly for a job. He was seated behind a large carved desk and thundered at me. How about it, young man? I said. Mr. Funkhauser, I believe I can make money for you. He immediately rose and invited me to sit in one of the large upholstered chairs. I enumerated my ideas and the qualifications I had to realize these ideas, as well as how they would contribute to his personal success and that of his businesses. RJ, as he became known to me, hired me at once, and for over 20 years, I have grown in his enterprises and we both have prospered. Talking in terms of the other person's interests pays off for both parties. Howard Z. Herzig, a leader in the field of employee communications, has always followed this principle. When asked what reward he got from it, Mr. Herzig responded that he not only received a different reward from each person, but that, in general, the reward had been an enlargement of his life each time he spoke to someone. Principle 5. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. How to make people like you instantly. I was waiting in line to register a letter in the post office at 33rd Street and 8th Avenue in New York. I noticed that the clerk appeared to be bored with the job, weighing envelopes, handing out stamps, making change, issuing receipts, the same monotonous grind year after year. So I said to myself, I am going to try to make that clerk like me. Obviously, to make him like me, I must say something nice, not about myself, but about him. So I asked myself, what is there about him that I can honestly admire? That is sometimes a hard question to answer, especially with strangers. But in this case, it happened to be easy. I instantly saw something I admired no end. So while he was weighing my envelope, I remarked with enthusiasm, I certainly wish I had your head of hair. He looked up, half startled, his face beaming with smiles. Well, it isn't as good as it used to be, he said modestly. He said modestly. I assured him that although it might have lost of its some of its pristine glory, nevertheless it was still magnificent. He was immensely pleased. We carried on a pleasant little conversation, and the last thing he said to me was, "Many people have admired my hair. I'll bet that person went out to lunch that day walking on air. I'll bet he went home that night and told his wife about it. I bet he looked in the mirror and said, 'It is a beautiful head of hair.'" I told this story once in public, and a man asked me afterwards, "What did you want to get out of him?" What was I trying to get out of him? What was I trying to get out of him? If we are so contemptibly selfish that we can't radiate a little happiness and pass on a bit of honest appreciation without trying to get something out of the other person in return, if our souls are no bigger than sour crab apples, we shall meet with failure we so richly deserve. Oh, yes, I did want something out of that chap. I wanted something priceless, and I got it. I got the feeling that I had done something for him without his being able to do anything whatever in return for me. That is a feeling that flows and sinks in your memory long after the incident is past. There is one all important law of human conduct. If we obey that law, we shall almost never get into trouble. In fact, that law, if obeyed, will bring us countless friends and constant happiness. But the very instant we break the law, we shall get into endless trouble. The law is this: always make the other person feel important. John Dewey, as we have already noted, said that the desire to be important is the deepest urge in human nature. And William James said, the deepest principle in human's nature is the craving to be appreciated. As I have already pointed out, it is this urge that differentiates us from the animals. It is this urge that has been responsible for the civilization itself. Philosophers have been speculating on the rules of human relationships for thousands of years, and out of all that speculation, there has evolved only one important percept. It is not new, it is as old as history. Zoroaster taught it to his followers in Persia 2500 years ago. Confuc- Confucius Confucius preached it in China 24 centuries ago. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, taught it to his disciples in the valley of the Han. Buddha preached it out on the bank of the holy Ganges 500 years before Christ. The sacred books of Hinduism taught it a thousand of years before that. Jesus taught it among the stony hills of Judea 19 centuries years ago. Jesus summed it up in one thought, probably the most important rule in the world: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. You want the approval of those with whom you come in contact. You want recognition of your true worth. You want a feeling that you're important in your little world. You don't want to listen to cheap, insincere flattery, but you do crave sincere appreciation. You want your friends and associates to be, as Charles Schwab put it, hearty in their approbation and lavish in their praise. All of us want that. So let's obey the golden rule and give unto others that what we would have. So let's obey the golden rule and give unto others what we would have others give unto us. How? When? Where? The answer is all the time, everywhere. David G. Smith of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, told one of our classes how he handled a delicate situation when he was asked to take charge of the refreshment booth at a charity concert. The night of the concert, I arrived at the park and found two elderly ladies in a very bad humor standing next to the refreshment stand. Apparently, each thought that she was in charge of this each thought that she was in charge of this project. As I stood there pondering what to do, me of the members of the sponsoring committee appeared and handed me a cash box and thanked me for taking over the project. She introduced Rose and Jane as my helpers and then ran off. A great silence ensued. Realizing that the cash box was a symbol of authority, of sorts. I gave the box to Rose and explained that I might not be able to keep the money straight, that if she took care of it, I would feel better. I then suggested to Jane that she show two teenagers who had been assigned to refreshments how to operate the soda machine, and I asked her to be responsible for that part of the project. That evening, the evening was very enjoyable with Rose happily counting the money, Jane supervising the teenagers, and me enjoying the concert. You don't have to wait until you're ambassador to France or chairman of the Claimback committee of your lodge. Before you use this philosophy of appreciation, you can work magic with it almost every day. If, for example, If, for example, the waitress brings the smashed potatoes when we have ordered French fries, let's say, I'm sorry to trouble you, but I prefer French fries. She'll probably reply, no problem at all, and will be glad to change the potatoes because we have shown respect for her. Little phrases such as I'm so sorry to trouble you, would you be so kind as to, won't you please, would you mind, thank you. Little courtesies like these oil the cogs of the monotonous grind of everyday life, and incidentally they are hallmark of good breeding. Let's take another illustration. Hall Caine's novels, The Christian, The Deemster, The Manxman, among them, were all bestsellers in the early part of the century. Millions of people read his novels, countless millions. He was the son of a blacksmith. He never had more than 8 years schooling in his life, yet when he died, he was the richest literary man of his time. The story goes like this. Hall Caine loved sonnets and ballads, so he devoured all of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's poetry. He even wrote a lecture chanting the praises of Rossetti's artistic achievement and sent a copy to Rossetti himself. Rossetti was delighted. Any young man who has such an exalted opinion of my ability. Rossetti probably said to himself, must be brilliant. So Rossetti invited this blacksmith's son to come to London and act as his secretary. That was the turning point in Hawkins's life for in his new position, he met the literary artists of the day. Profiting by their advice and inspired by their encouragement, he launched upon a career that emblazoned his names across the sky. His home, Greba Castle on the Isle of Man, became a mecca for tourists from the far corners of the world, and he left a multi-million dollar estate. Yet, who knows, he might have died poor and unknown had he not written an essay expressing his admiration for a famous man. Such is the stupendous power of sincere, heartfelt appreciation. Rossetti considered himself important. That is not strange. Almost everyone considers himself important, very important. The life of many a person could probably be changed if only someone would make him feel important. Ronald J. Rowland, who's one of the instructors of our course in California, is also a teacher of arts and crafts. He wrote to us about a student named Chris in his beginning crafts class. Chris was a very quiet, shy boy lacking in self confidence, the kind of student that often does not receive the attention he deserves. I also teach an advanced class that had grown to be somewhat of a status symbol and a privilege for a student to have earned the right to be in it. On Wednesday, Chris was diligently working at his desk. I really felt there was a hidden fire deep inside him. I asked Chris if he would like to be in the advanced class. How I wish I could express the look in Chris' face. The emotions in that shy 14-year-old boy trying to hold back his tears. Who? Me? Mr. Rowland? Am I good enough? Yes, Chris, you are good enough. I had to leave at that point because tears were coming to my eyes. As Chris walked the class that day, seemingly 2 inches taller, he looked at me with bright blue eyes and said in a positive voice, thank you, Mr. Rowland. Chris taught me a lesson I will never forget. A deep desire to feel important. To help me never forget this rule, I made a sign which reads, "You are important." This sign hangs in the front of the classroom for all to see and to remind me that each student I face is equally important. The unvarnished truth is that almost all the people you meet feel themselves superior to you in some way, and a sure way to their hearts is to let them realize in some subtle way to recognize their importance and recognize it sincerely. Sorry for that. Um, Chris taught me a lesson I will never forget. Yeah. Chris taught me a lesson I will never forget, a deep desire to feel important. To help me never forget this rule, I made a sign which reads, "You are important." This sign hangs in front of the class for all to see and to remind me that each student I face is equally important. The unvarnished truth is that all the people you meet feel themselves superior to you in some way, and a sure way to their hearts is to let them realize in some subtle way to recognize their importance and recognize it sincerely. Remember what Emerson said: "Every man I meet is my superior in some way. In that, I learn of him." And the pathetic part of it is that frequently those who have the least justification for a feeling of achievement bolster up their egos by a show of tumult and conceit, which is truly nauseating. As Shakespeare put it, "Man, proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, plays such fantastic tricks before high heaven as make the angels weep." I'm going to tell you how business people in my courses have applied these principles with remarkable results. Let's take the case of a Connecticut attorney. Because of his relatives, he prefers not to have his name mentioned. Shortly after joining the course, Mr. Roland drove to Long Island with his wife to visit some of her relatives. She left him to chat with an old aunt of hers, and they rushed off by herself to visit some of the younger relatives. Since he soon had to give a speech professionally on how he applied the principles of appreciation, he thought he would gain some worthwhile experience talking with the elder lady. So he looked around the house to see what he could admire. "This house was built about 1819, wasn't it?" he inquired. "Yes," she replied. "That is precisely how it was built." "It reminds me of the house I was born in," he said. "It's beautiful, well built, roomy. You know, they don't build houses like this anymore." "You're right," the old lady agreed. "The young folks nowadays don't care for beautiful homes. All they want is a small apartment, and then they go off gadding about in their automobiles." "This is a dream house," she said in a voice vibrating with tender memories. "This house was built with love. My husband and I dreamed about it for years before we built it." She showed Mr. Roland about the house, and he expressed his admiration she had picked up in her travels and cherished over a lifetime. Paisley shawls, an old English tea set. Yeah, I'm so sorry for that. There's been some network issues over here. Italian paintings and silk drapery that had once hung in a French sh- statue. After showing Mr. Roland through the house, she took him out to the garage. There, jacked up on a blocks, was a Packard car in mint condition. "My husband bought the car for me shortly before he passed on," she said softly. "I have never ridden it in since his death. You appreciate nice things, and I'm going to give this car to you." "Why, Auntie?" he said. "You overwhelm me. I appreciate your generosity, of course, but I couldn't possibly accept it. I'm not even a relative of yours. I have a new car, and you have many relatives that would like to have that Packard. Relatives? She exclaimed. Yes, I have relatives who are just waiting till I die so they can get the car, but they're not going to get it. If you don't want to give it to them, if you don't want to give it to them, you can very easily sell it to a second-hand dealer, he told her. Sell it? She cried. Do you think I would sell this car? Do you think I would stand to see strangers riding up and down street in that car? The car that my husband bought for me? I wouldn't dream of selling that. I'm going to give it to you. You appreciate beautiful things. He tried to get out of accepting the car, but he couldn't without hurting her feelings. This lady, left all alone in a big house with her paisley shawls, her French antics, and her memories, was starving for a little recognition. She had once been young and beautiful and sought after. She had once built a house warm with love and had collected things from all over Europe to make it beautiful. Now, in the isolated loneliness of old age, she craved a little human warmth, a little genuine appreciation, and no one gave it to her. And when she found it, like a spring in the desert, her gratitude couldn't adequately express itself with anything less than the gift of a cherished Packard. Let's take another case. Donald Donald Yam Donald M. McMahon, who was superintendent of Lewis and Valentine nurserymen and landscape architects in Rye, New York, related this incident. Shortly after I attended the talk on how to win friends and influence people, I was landscaping the estate of a famous attorney. The owner came out to give a few instructions about where he wished to plant a mass of rhododendrons and azaleas. I said, so sorry. Uh, yeah, I said, Judge, you have a lovely hobby. I have been admiring your beautiful dogs. I understand you win a lot of blue ribbons every year at the show in Madison Square Garden. The effect of this little expression of appreciation was striking. Yes, the judge replied. Fun with my dogs. Would you like to see my kennel? He spent almost an hour showing me his dogs and the prizes they had won. He even brought out their pedigrees and explained about the bloodlines responsible for such beauty and intelligence. Finally, turning to me, he asked, Do you have any small children? Yes, I do, I replied. I have a son. Well, wouldn't he like a puppy? The judge inquired. Oh, yes, he would be a tickled pink. All right, I'm going to give him one, the judge announced. He started to tell me how to feed the puppy. Then he paused. You'll forget it if I tell you. I'll write it out. So the judge went in the house, typed out the pedigree and feeding instructions, and gave me a puppy worth several $100 and 1 hour and 15 minutes of his valuable time, largely because I had expressed my honest admiration for his hobby and achievements. George Eastman of Kodak fame invented the transparent film that made motion pictures possible, amassed a fortune of $100 million, and made himself one of the most famous businessmen on earth. Yet, in spite of all these tremendous accomplishments, he craved little recognitions even as you and I. To illustrate, when Eastman was building the Eastman School of Music and also Kilburn Hall in Rochester, James Adamson, then president of the Superior Seating Company of New York, wanted to get the order to supply the theater chairs for these buildings. Phoning the architect, Mr. Adamson made an appointment to see Mr. Eastman in Rochester. When Adamson arrived, the architect said, I know you want to get this order, but I can tell you right now that you won't stand a ghost of a show if you take more than 5 minutes of George Eastman's time. He's a strict disciplinarian, he's very busy, so tell your story quickly and get out. Adamson was prepared to just do that. When he was ushered into the room, he saw Mr. Eastman bending over a pile of papers at his desk. Presently, Mr. Eastman looked up, removed his glasses, and walked toward the architect and Mr. Adamson, saying, Good morning, gentlemen. What can I do for you? The architect introduced them, and then Mr. Adamson said, While we have been waiting for you, Mr. Eastman, I've been admiring your office. I wouldn't mind working in a room like this myself. I'm in the interior woodworking business and I never saw a beautiful office in all my life. George Eastman replied, "You remind me of something I had almost forgotten. It is beautiful, isn't it? I enjoyed it a great deal when it was first built. But I come down here now with a lot of other things on my mind and sometimes don't even see the room for weeks at a time." Adamson walked over and rubbed his hand across a panel. "This is English oak, isn't it? A little different texture from Italian oak." "Yes," Eastman replied. "Imported English oak. It was selected for me by a friend who specializes in fine woods." Then Eastman showed him about the room, commenting on the proportions, the coloring, the hand carving, and other effects he had helped to plan execute. While drifting about the room, admiring the woodwork, they paused before a window, and George Eastman, in his modest, soft spoken way, pointed out some of the institutions through which he was trying to help humanity: the University of Rochester, the General Hospital, the but the homeopathic hospital, the Friendly Home, the Children's Hospital. Mr. Adamson congratulated him warmly on the idealistic way he was using this wealth to alleviate the sufferings of humanity. Presently, George Eastman unlocked a glass case and pulled out the first camera he had ever owned, an invention he had bought from an Englishman. Adamson questioned him at length about his early struggles to get started in business, and Mr. Eastman spoke with real feeling about the poverty of his childhood, telling how his widowed mother had kept a boarding house while he clerked in an insurance office. The terror of poverty haunted him day and night, and he resolved to make enough money so that his mother wouldn't have to work. Mr. Adamson drew him out with further questions and listened, absorbed while he related the story of his experiments with dry photographic plates. He told how he had worked in an office all day and sometimes experimented all night, taking only brief naps while the chemicals worked, sometimes working and sleeping in his clothes for 72 hours at a stretch. James Adamson had been ushered into Eastman's office at 10:15 and had been warned that he must not take more than 5 minutes, but an hour had passed. Then 2 hours passed, and they were still talking. Finally, George Eastman turned to Adamson and said, "The last time I was in Japan, I bought some chairs, brought them home, and put them in my sun porch. But the sun peeled the paint, so I went downtown the other day and bought some paint and painted the chairs myself. Would you like to see what sort of a job I can do painting chairs? All right, come up to my home and have lunch with me, and I'll show you." After lunch, Mr. Eastman showed Adamson the chairs he had bought from Japan. They weren't worth more than a few dollars. But George Eastman, now a multimillionaire, was proud of them because he himself had painted them. The order the order receipts announced to $90,000. Who do you suppose got the order? James Adamson or one of his competitors? From the time of this story until Mr. Eastman's death, he and James Adamson were close friends. Claude Morias, a restaurant owner in Rouen, France, used this principle and saved his restaurant the loss of a key employee. This woman had been in his employ for 5 years and was a vital link between Marias and his staff of 21 people. He was shocked to receive a registered letter from her advising of her resignation. Mr. Marias reported. Mr. Maria one yeah, Mr. Marias reported, "I was very surprised and even more disappointed because I was under the impression that I had been fair to her and receptive to her needs. Inasmuch as she was a friend as well as an employee, I probably had taken her too much for granted, maybe was even more demanding of her than of other employees. I could not, of course, accept this resignation without some explanation. I took her aside and said, 'Polly, you must understand that I cannot accept your resignation. You must understand that I might not accept your resignation. You mean a great deal to me and to this company, and you're as important to the success of this restaurant as I am. I repeated this in front of the entire staff, and I invited her to my home and reiter- reiterated my confidence in her with my family present. Paule withdrew her resignation, and today I can rely on her as never before. I frequently reinforce this by expressing my appreciation for what she does, and showing her how important she is to me and to the restaurant. Talk to the people about themselves, said Disraeli, one of the shrewdest men who ever ruled the British Empire. Talk to the people about themselves, and they will listen for hours. Principle 6. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. In a nutshell, 6 ways to make people like you. Principle 1. Become genuinely interested in other people. Principle 2. Smile. Principle 3. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and the most important sound in any language. Principle 4. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Principle 5. Talk in terms of other person's interests. Principle 6. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So I think that's by that we complete part 2, and part 3 can be continued tomorrow. I think we will stop here. Um, yeah. Would any one of you would like to volunteer for the takeaways, today's takeaways? Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Good
Yes,
evening.
Taranshit ma'am.
Yeah. Good
Good
evening,
evening.
everyone. Yeah. First of all, an information to be given. Today is my birthday. So
Oh, happy birthday!
thank you.
A
Thank
very
you so
happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Tejashree.
Wish you a
Uh,
very happy birthday.
thank you. Uh, this
Happy
is
birthday,
what
man.
this is
Wish you
what
happy birthday, man.
thank you, dear. Thank you so much. The thing is here when it is told how to feel important. This is one principle that I've always followed. And like I always do this on the teachers day or whatever day is there, whenever my children or any of my friends wish me, so I just take a snapshot of it and post it on my story or on my status. And I have been doing this so long, but incidentally today itself 3 of my students and 2 of my cousin bhabis, they saw this story on that they saw the status, so they felt so nice, they called me, I think so, and they were so extremely happy that I'd put their wish on my status, so they were extremely happy about it. This is always whenever someone makes you feel important, you definitely feel happy, however angry, however gross you are, but a word of appreciation, thing to make you feel important feels nice. So this principle I've practiced it today only. So this is what is my
That
takeaway.
that is that is really nice. That is really nice to
Pratika
hear.
ma'am also has wished me, so I posted hers also. I don't know whether she has seen it or not, but I did that also. So this is something really always that children and or anyone who is there, they feel important. That yes, she has put our uh, wishes with the name, with the snapshot, it, and people have liked it, so they feel very nice about it. Thank you.
That was really nice to hear, Taranjit ma'am. Um, Next, anyone would like to tell, volunteer for today's takeaways, telling today's takeaways? Chandrasekhar?
Hi everyone, this is Bharat. So one of the key takeaway which I feel would be a right point is like sometimes we forget the person whom we met, right? Uh, and the next time when we meet, so we remember that we met him, and we feel like his name would be like starting with this letter, that letter. So we'll miss that. So before I came across this kind of situation, and one of my friends suggested me that uh, you know if we remember the name of the other person, maybe by, for example, like maybe with the nicknames, right? So similar names, even if we start try to remember in that way, so that would be a good thing. And in fact, the other person would be feeling very excited and thinking happy also, right? Saying that we met just like one time and he recalls me, kind of feeling that person will have. So that is one of my takeaway.
Sure.
Just wanted to express.
Yeah,
That's it.
thank you. Thank you, Bharat. Um, Anyone next?
Yeah, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my
your voice is a bit low. Could you come closer to the mic, maybe?
okay, it's fine.
Yeah, now it is. Yeah, now it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so my key takeaway is like emotional connection. Like people appreciate when others go out there up their way to understand their passion. So this builds trust, loyalty, and emotional connection. So that's my key takeaway from the story.
Yes. I think, yeah. Thank you, Lokesh, for that.
Yeah.
Chandrasekhar Sarveshwaran, would you guys like to volunteer for today's takeaway, or do we close the session for today? Ma'am?
Yeah, I think we can close. The Sarveshwaran,
Yeah.
would you like to say something? Okay, we can call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah. He said yes, ma'am. You could turn on your mic and talk, Sarveshwaram.
Yeah.
Um, Are you unable to turn the mic on, or? Oh, okay. You could put your takeaways in the chat. That is not an issue. That would be fine. Yeah. Okay. Yes, yes, Sarveshwar, you can read the previous chapters then. And if you have any doubts, or and you could tell your takeaways in the next class. That would be fine. Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say, or can we close the session for today? Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you everyone. I think we will be ending the session for today. Good night.
Good
Thank you,
night,
ma'am.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
Good night.